Okay. Next section here. Once again, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me see, make sure I'm picking up at the right place here. Ah, here we go. Next section, the Big Dig. The Big Dig, the search to find the original location of the Dead Sea Scrolls and perhaps more of them, gets off to a slow start. The timing of what has been called the greatest and most significant archaeological find of the 20th century could not have been worse. Dramatic historical events imploded the Mideast as the British prepared to withdraw from the region, and Arab-Jewish relations became increasingly hostile. On May 14, 1948, the Jewish People's Council met in Tel Aviv and declared the independent state of Israel. The region became a war zone as various nations, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, responded to the news. With the international headlines daily reporting new airstrikes and incursions, the Dead Sea Scrolls were not exactly in the limelight. But behind the scenes of political upheaval, religious and academic forces were mobilizing. By 1949, a year and a half after the Bedouin goat herds had discovered the first scrolls, the significance of the find had been ascertained by the scholarly community. Yet no trained archaeologist had yet visited the Qumran site. The Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem tried, but the war rendered the area too dangerous. On January 7, 1949, a ceasefire was negotiated, the terms of which dictated that the largest central section of what had formerly been Palestine was to remain Arab. It was then occupied and annexed by Jordan. This meant that the eastern side of Jerusalem and the area of Qumran were now part of Jordan. Both the Department of Antiquities and the École Biblique were under Jordanian rule. Luckily, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization appointed a Belgian Air Force captain named Philippe Lippens to oversee the terms of the ceasefire. Captain Lippens just happened to be Jesuit trained, and he was not only aware of but had read the scrolls. That does not seem right. He was not only aware but had read the I'm sorry. He was not only aware of but had read the scrolls. He approached Father Roland Devah, the head of the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem, officially the Palestine Archaeological Museum, and asked him to legitimize an official dig by agreeing to serve as technical director of the excavations. The Rockefellers involved. Devah had been skeptical of the scrolls, but at Lippens' urging, he agreed to team up with Gerald Lancaster Harding, the British director of the Department of Antiquities of Jordan. Thus the digs began in earnest around the ruins of Qumran near the northern end of the Dead Sea. Let's see. Subsequent discoveries. Pottery, oil lamps, and coins dating to 10 BCE found in the subsequent excavation of Cave 1. Matter of fact, I'll show you something here before we get that far. It gives a diagram. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. This looks like Area 51. But they give you an issue. I'm not sure what this is right here yet, but I think you'll see it in another moment or so. But here's a cave. There's a whole bunch of caves over here. There's caves over here. Caves all over this thing. How you'd stumble onto this. without a goat is beyond me. Okay. Let's see. Hang on. What did I just do? Oh, here we go. Okay, subsequent discoveries. Pottery, oil lamps, and coins dating to BCE found in the subsequent excavation of Cave 1 suggest to Deva that it was the site of the Essene settlement mentioned by two first-century Roman scholars, Pliny the Elder and Flavius Josephus, in their writings. The Essenes were real interesting. I read a lot about that commune group. The Essenes were a Jewish sect that strove to attain purity through vegetarianism, the banning of sexual contact, and renunciation of all sensory gratification. It is thought that their scholars pored over the ancient prophecies of the Hebrew Bible in search of predictions of their own time. Deva's identification of the Qumran caves as the home of the Essenes is a theory that had been hotly contested among academics ever since. Between 1949 and 1956, a total of 11 caves were discovered and excavated in Qumran, with Bedouin treasure hunters and Jordanian-appointed archaeologists racing to unearth the now legendary and valuable antiquities. Transporting them without care or cataloging the items added difficulty to the project, I'll bet. While the archaeologists gathered at their camps with maps and field notes, the nimble Bedouins scrambled among the treacherous cliffs in search of artifacts. Each cave yielded new clues about the times in which both Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism emerged. Subsequent study has divided the scrolls into three groups. First one, text from the Hebrew Bible, 250 BCE to 68 CE, 40 to present. The second one, Bible text from the Second Temple period, including the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, the Book of Tobit, the Wisdom of Sirach, and Psalms 152 and 155, and to present. If you ever get a chance, there's eSword, the Bible software. You can go down on there and download a, it's not Gideon. There's a Bible on there. It's really old. I can't think of the name of it, darn it. But it has all those books that we just mentioned. I'll have to see if I can think of it. And it's free. Some interesting books, especially Sirach, Wisdom of Sirach. The third, sectarian writings from the Second Temple period, being rules and regulations of the sect believed to be the Essenes, including the War Scroll, the Pesher, and Habakkuk, and the Rule of the Blessing. Once the Qumran caves had been excavated, the fragile materials were transported to a safe, temperature-controlled museum room in Jerusalem, known as the Scrollery, to stop further decay. The very long and extremely complex process of interpreting them began. Scientists were summoned to determine how best to unroll and decipher the scrolls. Scholars had to be found who could contextualize the contents. Boy, there's a job. Political animosities had to be put aside in the interest of antiquity. To complete matters, the scrolls had become something of a cottage industry. Various Bedouin tribes competed for access to the caves, treasure hunters descended upon the area, forgeries circulated, and random bits and pieces of the scrolls were smuggled to and fro in cigarette wrappers and shoe inserts. 11 caves were eventually discovered, with the Bedouins uncovering 5 of them. The Herculean task of piecing the fragments together to form cohesive sentences was daunting beyond belief and continues to this day. Bruce Zuckerman, associate professor of the University of Southern California, has likened the process to solving the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes I imagine that my colleagues and I are standing around a big table and we are working on 700 jigsaw puzzles, and the puzzles have about 10,000 pieces, but they're all jumbled together. Ooh. Nevertheless, scholarship has prevailed, and the contents of the 11 caves are now available to whisper their secrets to the world. Okay. That's the end of that section. Call that a chapter, I guess. I'm going to read this thing here. It's called Three Men, One Vision. It's got the picture of the three guys here. This is Deva, the guy that's mentioned. Although very different in their approach and intention, there were two men who were vital to the discovery and revelation that the Dead Sea Scrolls were one of the greatest archaeological finds of modern times. Roland Deva, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Roland Deva was a charismatic, eloquent, engaging raconteur. His appearance was in great contrast to his credentials. A bushy, bearded chain smoker who wore glasses and a black beret with his white monk's robe. Deva was a Catholic priest born in Paris in 1903. He studied at the seminary of St. Sulpice, where he learned Arabic and Aramaic. Interesting. In 1929, he joined the Dominican order, which sent him to the École Biblique in Jerusalem. Brilliant and erudite, he was also, as his detractors claimed, ruthless and vindictive, a right-winger who, in his youth, had been a member of the Action franchise, a group that supported dictatorships in Germany, Italy, and Spain. Deva would lead the early digs at Qumran, and his expertise as an archaeologist and historian lent great credibility and legitimacy to the early days of the project. E.L. Sukenik, an Orthodox Jew and distinguished professor of archaeology at Hebrew University, could not have been more different from Deva. Sukenik's assessment of the Bedouin scroll fragments helped influence the Jordanian government that an official excavation at Qumran was of vital importance. He was instrumental in verifying that the first scrolls found were genuine ancient documents written on papyrus and in Hebrew. Said Sukenik, upon seeing the scrolls for the first time, "My hands shook as I started to unwrap one of them. I read a few sentences. It was written in beautiful biblical Hebrew. Suddenly, I had the feeling that I was being privileged by destiny to gaze upon a Hebrew scroll which had not been read for more than 2,000 years." His great disappointment was that the political climate at the time kept him from being a part of Deva's team. However, his push to keep the scrolls out of the hands of private owners and bring them to Israel for scholarly study as a cultural heritage was eventually realized. Sukenik died in February of 1953. Shortly afterward, his son, Yigal Yadin, arranged for the scrolls to be brought to Israel. Yadin said, "I cannot avoid the feeling that there is something symbolic in the discovery of the scrolls and their acquisition at the moment of the creation of the State of Israel." I just said during the State of Israel is about the time they excavated these. It is as if these manuscripts had been waiting in caves for 2,000 years, ever since the destruction of Israel's independence, until the people of Israel had returned to their home and regained their freedom. We'll end it right there. The next section, the journey of scrolls. Anyhow, we'll end it right there. Love you, God bless.